Hello and welcome to pmblounge.com. Today we are going over the close project or phase process. So this is the process which is required to be done once you're done with the project or once you're done with the phase of the project. So let's say you're done with the project. What do, right? You go home, you party or something, right? What exactly is this process about and what do we do in this process? That is exactly what we are going over in this video. So let's get started. First up, it's very important to understand where are we right now. Project integration management, that is the knowledge area. The process group is closing, and if you can see the red encircled is close project or phase process. So this is the process that we are discussing today. All the previous processes that you see, right? The two processes at the monitoring and controlling, which are monitor and control project work, perform integrated change control. Under executing, you've got direct and manage project work. Under planning, you've got develop project management plan. And under initiating, you've got develop project charter. All of these processes have been discussed earlier, and I'll link to the entire playlist of integration management in the description so you can go over, you can kind of understand all these processes. Today, we are discussing the last process in the project integration management knowledge area, which is close project or phase. So let's understand this in a much better and deeper way. First up, why is this important? And that's exactly what we try to answer in each of our videos. Every topic we try to see why is any topic important from PMP perspective, right? So this is the process. The close project or phase process is the very process where we deliver the project, the product of the project, and get sign off from the customer, right? So you've completed your product, you've done all the work that is required, and then you deliver the product of the project to the customer. And not just that, you get a sign off from the customer. You make sure that the customer is happy. You have delivered what the customer was looking for. So a formal sign off is required, and that is one of the most important activity of this process. Other than that, you create lessons learned, so you complete your entire lessons learned documentation. That is done in this process as well. And if you see these two activities, right, you completing the entire project, right, and then handing over the product of the project to the customer and getting a sign off, that is when your project completes, right? That's when you have done what you set out to achieve, right? That's when you're done. And then you create lessons learned so that other project managers for future projects can make use of those lessons learned, can make use of the information that you pass on as part of the organizational process assets, right? So if you see, closing is actually as important as initiating. You are doing some very important stuff in this process, right? So that is why this is important. Other than that, from exam perspective, you will definitely get questions from the closing process, the close project or phase process. You'll definitely get questions from it. A lot of people think that this is easy. It's easy, of course, but it's again, it's important to read through it. It's one of those topics where people, aspirants, the PMP aspirants don't kind of take it lightly. I'd say don't take this lightly. Uh, Treat it as important as other processes, as other topics of the PMP preparation, and you'll definitely be able to score marks from the close project or phase process. So what do we exactly do? So first up, you need to understand that all projects need to go through the close project or phase process, even if the project is terminated or cancelled. And this is also a potential PMP question, right? You might get a question that asks you, okay, the project, you've received an email from, let's say, your customer or your sponsor, and the mail says that the project needs to be terminated ASAP. What do you do next? Well, you move to this process. You move to the close project or phase process. You complete your lessons learned. You get a sign off that the project needs to be terminated, and then you close out the project. So even if the project is not complete, right? Even if the project is terminated or cancelled, you still have to do the close project or phase process. A formal customer sign off on the final product is obtained. So that's one thing that we do, one of the most important things that we do as part of this process, the final customer, formal customer sign off that we get. And once customer signs off, the project team documents the lessons learned, right? Remember the order here, right? You're getting a customer sign off first and then obtaining the, then, you obtain the customer sign off first, the formal customer sign off first. And after that, you complete your lessons learned, because there could be potential lessons learned pointers from the customer sign off process itself, right? So that's why you first obtain the customer sign off, then your project team, not just you, right? It's not just the project manager who completes the lessons learned, it's the entire project team. So that's when, once you receive the sign off, that's when the project team starts and completes the documentation of the lessons learned. One thing to note here is that lessons learned is documented throughout the project, right? So it's not like you get to know something that your project team, let's say, faced an issue, and then the project team resolved that issue, and you feel like this is something that needs to go into the lessons learned, and you wait till this process, the close phase or project process, to document it. That's not how it works. You maintain the documentation of lessons learned throughout the project. So this process is when you finalize it, when you add any additional lessons learned um, that the project team might have, that the project manager might have, and you kind of complete the documentation of lessons learned. But do note that this is not the only process where you do lessons learned, right? Throughout the project team completes the documentation of lessons learned. They come up with lessons that they have learned and then they document it. So it's not just this process. That's one thing to note. Finally, the project team is released. This is typically the last activity of this process. So close project or phase, the last activity typically is to release the project team. Remember, you cannot release the project team before getting the customer sign off. You cannot release the project team before the lessons learned are documented, right? So what does close phase signify? We talked about close project. Everything that we talked about seemed to be the last things that we do, the last set of activities that we do when we are closing the project. But this process is known as close project or phase. So what does close phase mean here, right? So what does close phase signify? So formal sign off, although not necessarily from the customer, and lessons learned documentation might be required on each phase of the project. And thus, close phase is a process that will be repetitive. So, close phase or project, close project or phase is one of the processes that can be repetitive throughout your project, right? So, if the project team has decided that on each phase of the project, we will obtain a formal sign off from key stakeholders. It can include the customer as well. It can just be the customer, or it can just be the sponsor, or it can be a number of key stakeholders, right? So once you're, let's say you're doing a software project, once you're done with your requirements, you've made your requirements document, you get a formal sign off so that you can move from the requirement gathering phase to the software design phase. So, moving from one phase to another phase within the project sometimes might also require formal sign off, not necessarily from the customer, but from key stakeholders, right? So that depends on the setting of the project, that depends on the environment you work in, that depends on a lot of things, the kind of projects you're dealing with, right? So this process is known as close project or phase because A formal sign off is required when you close the project. A formal sign off might be required if your team decides to, if your organization wants you to, might be required. A formal sign off might be required at the end of closing of each phase of your project as well. Lessons learned is again the same thing, right? It is possible that you decide to document lessons learned at the closure of each phase, not just the closure of the entire project. So that is why this process is known as close project or phase. So that's all that we had in this video. Hope you learned about closed project or phase process. There's a detailed article which I'll link to in the description, available at pmblounge.com. You can go over that article as well. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, and check us out on our social media, facebook.com/pmblounge and twitter.com/pmblounge. And as always, do check out the website pmblounge.com, your number one free resource for PMP certification and project management industry information. Thank you.